You're listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Keane. I'm the editor-in-chief of the international renowned journal Fire Ecology. Fire Ecology is a journal that is published by Springer, but is backed up and overseen by the Association of Fire Ecologists. I am going to transition off the editorship, and Jeff Kane is taking over, so he will be doing these podcasts in about 2 months. But right now, we are going to be talking about a really cool paper that just recently got published in Fire Ecology. The name and title of the paper is The State of Giant Sequoias, Losses, Risk, and Opportunities. And we have three of the authors here, Kristen, Linnea, and Ray. Could you introduce yourself? You start off, Kristen.
Sure. My name is Kristen Shive, and I am an assistant cooperative extension specialist at UC Berkeley, and I led this effort.
Linnea?
My name is Linnea Hardlund. I'm the fire ecologist in Yosemite National Park.
And Bree?
My name is Bree Baker. I'm an associate research specialist in Kristen's lab at UC Berkeley.
Well, welcome, the three of you. Really appreciate the time you're taking to come and talk about this wonderful paper. Linnea, why is it that sequoias are so darn cool?
It's hard to put into words why sequoias are so cool. If you've seen them, you know they're amazing trees. They're longest lived species in the world, largest trees in the world by girth, not by height. That would be their cousin, the coast redwood. But sequoias are just amazing trees because, especially for fire ecologists, they are really cool species. They are semi-serotinous, and so their cones partially open from fire, and their regeneration is stimulated from moderate severity fire. They also have thick bark, which makes them resistant to intensity or loss mortality from fire, specifically low, moderate pockets of high severity fire, which is their defined fire regime or part of their defined fire regime. Their bark can be up to 2 feet thick. It's really fibrous. It's really cool. But really the thing that's most amazing about giant sequoias is just how large they are and how old they are and their presence when you're there in a grove. They're just a really amazing tree. And for fire ecologists, they're really applicable to what we do. They respond really well to fire, and they have a really intertwined relationship with fire.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about sequoias is they have this unbelievable fire record in the rings.
Exactly.
Why did you want to write this paper, Linnea?
Yeah, so this paper came about. Kristen and I spent quite a few years talking about this paper before it came to be, specifically following 2020. As many of you know, 2020 was a really big fire year in California, also a really big fire year in the giant sequoia range. And so in 2020 and 2021, there were two very large fires within the giant sequoia range, following a pretty large fire in 2015 and some other fires in the range in 2017 that had pretty detrimental effects. And then in 2020 and 2021, those two fires combined led to a pretty significant amount of mortality in the range on the landscape. And Kristen will touch on that later and explain what went into those mortality estimates. But following these fires, managers like myself were really interested in understanding where are we at now and what can we do about this going into the future. And so first, a lot of us got together and formed what we now know as the Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition. And so the coalition has three arms. There's the Learn part, which is all the scientists. There's Act, which is a lot of the scientists and managers. And then there's Rally, which is all the folks that help communicate all the things that Act and Learn are doing. And so part of that discussions at GSLC, Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition, led to, again, we came back to the need for a paper like this for us to understand what the losses were, what the risks are in the future, where we're at right now, and how do we move forward from this significant amount of loss, and how do we start managing these lands both together as a coalition and within our respective agency boundaries.
Yeah, I was struck by the amount of mortality you guys reported in this paper. Kristen, you want to go into a little more about those mortality estimates?
Sure. So, as Linnea mentioned, we'd had all these fire impacts and we knew that the high severity was killing trees. There had been a little bit of work done on that, but we didn't really know how extensive those impacts were. And what we did as a larger research group is we brought together data from a bunch of different sources of different researchers who'd gone out to find where are the trees, is this tree alive or is this tree dead? Focusing a lot, of course, on the high severity, of which there has been a lot, and overall just a lot of fire. As Linnea mentioned, something like 82% of the range burned between 2015 and 2024. So a lot of area to work with and to estimate. And so at any rate, we gathered this data from a bunch of sources. It was over 3,000 mature trees where we had the live dead status, and we were able to link that with existing spatial data, the severity spatial data. And we made some assumptions on local densities. We outlined all of those in the paper. And what we found is that since 1984, where we have fire severity data, 17.6 of all large sequoias in existence have been killed by fire, which is really, really big amount. But only 0.2% of that was before 2015. So this is all really a recent phenomenon, and it's documenting the dramatic changes that we've been seeing and also highlighting what we want to avoid in the future.
Yeah, what I was also struck by is the fact that there was analysis of the risk of losing the species from the ecosystem. Bree, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So we across the range have, after 2020 and 2021, especially like Kristen was talking about, this concern for what we call local extirpation. So while sequoias as a species aren't about to go extinct, there are certainly some concerns and some specific areas where we are concerned about losing giant sequoias, both established trees and regeneration, in particular places and parts of groves that won't recover over time. The way that we estimated where those areas are across the landscape is that we took spatial data on severity to be able to estimate grove areas that no longer have living giant sequoias and where regeneration is probably really low. Those areas of concern tend to be dominated by places that experienced very high severity, where the crowns of trees were completely torched, both killing the trees and making it unlikely for seeds to survive, and therefore making regeneration also unlikely. We estimated that about 13% of grove area is at some risk, with about 3% at very high risk for this local extirpation. And managers are taking action in many of those areas by planting sequoias, but some of those areas are very, very remote and tough to replant. So some places may never have giant sequoia on them again.
Sad. So you touched on the management implications of all this, but Linnea, I wonder if you can add more. What are the implications of the finding of your study, not only to fire management, but to, resource management?
Yeah, so this really helps us put it into perspective in terms of when and how we need to go back and treat these acres. Kristen will talk about how that classification framework and how we defined those different classes of resistance to high severity fire, but it really is helping managers understand what groves we need to be more focused on in terms of where did we get a lot of really beneficial treatment from low or moderate fire, even from some of these larger fires that happened on the landscape recently, and helping us understand we don't have that much time, roughly 15 or so years, about the same amount of time as the normal fire return interval for giant sequoia, to retreat those acres so that they continue to be resistant to high severity fire. However, as we all know, it's been really hard to treat a lot of these acres, both from a compliance standpoint and from having shorter and shorter burn windows, just logistical in terms of where to go, how to get folks out there. Some groves, like Bree said, are really remote, are really just tough terrain, hard to get to, hard to get firefighting resources out there. So there's a lot that goes into planning these treatments and going from planning to actually implementing. A lot of times it can be multiple years of planning when you're going through compliance and trying to make sure that you aren't having negative impacts for other resources that exist within groves, because there are other resources that exist within groves besides giant sequoias. Even though we love the giant sequoias, there are other sensitive resources that exist, and we want to make sure that we aren't having a negative impact on those. And then within Yosemite and Sequoia, we're really lucky that we have a program, NEPA, so that we can implement prescribed fire on a larger scale a little bit more easily. But there are other land management agencies that don't have that, and that can become really cumbersome. Additionally, it can become difficult difficult to burn right now in Yosemite. We're trying to burn Mariposa Grove. But as you know, it's been a really dry winter. And so we're trying to balance the weather. Burn windows can be really short and they're getting shorter. And you just have to be really ready right when you have a burn window. And sometimes it's hard to be ready. You know, seasonal firefighters are just starting right now, but we have a good burn window. And so while we have a good burn window, the staff to implement it is not always ready, is not always there. We don't have enough people. It's maybe in the middle of winter. So this paper does really help us optimize and think about where we need to go and what those grove acres look like in terms of how we need to prioritize those treatments.
Wonderful. I really thank you three for being on this podcast. I can't help but think one of the people that would have loved to hear this podcast is Jan van Wagendonk, because he loved the sequoias as well. Kristen, do you want to recognize any co-authors before we go?
Yes, definitely. So in addition to Linnea and Bree, other really big contributors to the paper included David Soderberg, who did most of the mortality analyses, and he's with USGS. Also from USGS, Adrian Das and Nate Stevenson. From University of Nevada, Reno, Bryant Nagelson and Sarah Bisbing. And then with the Forest Service, Mark Meyer. So we really had a great, diverse team working on this one.
Yes. Again, I want to thank you three for showing up and telling us about this unique paper. Linnea mentioned that she wanted you to talk about some structure, but guess what? We're going to leave that for the reader to go in and look at and read in the paper. And if you are interested in this subject at all, and I don't know how you can't be, that paper is available for free. That's right. FREE for you to read the paper. So go ahead, download it, do whatever you need to find out just exactly how to manage giant sequoia. And with that, please turn in to the next Fire Ecology Chats.
Thank you for listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our show and leave us a review. To learn more about fire ecology and support our future work by becoming a member, visit fireecology.org. FIREECOLOGY.org.